I'm Veronica Salgado, the Marketing Director at FLCA, Florida Citizens Alliance, and I'm happy to announce that we are starting a monthly update to let you know everything that's happening in the education and family movement here in Florida and also nationwide. So I'm here today with our Chief of Operations, Ryan Kennedy, and we're going to first start off with a few updates of what's going on in our organization, FLCA, and then we're going to talk about what's happening overall in the pro-family and education freedom movement in the United States. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us.
Well, thanks, Veronica, for hosting this and having me on. Really, one of the first things I wanted to discuss with our audience is the special session that just finished up here in Florida. It was actually at the end of April related to artificial intelligence. And I wanted to first start off there because we had heard for a while working with the governor's office that they were going to call a special session related to AI, and they lumped it in with the congressional redistricting fight. And the result of it, sadly, was that our Speaker of the Florida House, Daniel Perez, did not want to take up any AI legislation. He said no bills were filed. However, based on what we know, that's not the case. There were people interested in filing it. So we're very disappointed in that. However, it was a great chance for us to get the message out there. And we know that it's working because AI sentiment across generations, most people feel that this technology is moving too quick. They're concerned about its effects on children, and they're concerned about data privacy and those sorts of factors, which are all things that we've highlighted. And in addition, recently it's come to light that there were effects such as a shooting that was linked to AI being used to help plan it, and there was other sad tragedies that happened because of that kind of technology assisting these criminal activities. And so we do feel it is still necessary to come up with really good legislation here in Florida to put guardrails in place to protect kids when it comes to this technology.
Yes, and throughout the session, FLCA, we were sending out action alerts to really get people to be involved, writing to their senators, writing to Daniel Perez on not blocking legislation to move forward so we make sure that there are protections put into place. So this is kind of just the beginning of pushing the protection of children and citizens and our privacy in the world of AI. So we're just starting this movement. And can you talk a little bit, Ryan, about how even nationwide we're seeing this movement grow in such a short time?
Yes, like you stated, it has been such a short time. There was a new survey that came out that showed out of a number of different issues, the fastest growing one of importance level was actually AI. So, and that's cross generation. And so most voters, upwards of 75% or higher, depending on what the question related to AI is, think that this technology needs guardrails. 77%, for example, think that they would rather vote for a person that believes in guardrails for office and that doesn't. And so that's a really good statistic as well. And again, this shows you it's happening. You may have seen these viral videos of college students booing at their graduation ceremony when their speakers say AI is going to be life-changing, it's going to change the job market, all these sorts of things. So we know this is happening, and you're right, it's just the beginning of hopefully some great policy outcomes. One of the things that I was lucky to be a part of at the Florida Citizens Alliance was we were invited as an organization because of our work here in Florida to go to DC to be with a number of other organizations in the country working on federal AI policy. And it was a great experience. I was up there for a week in Washington, D.C., meeting with survivors of parents that have lost their children to this kind of technology, and meeting with legislators, telling them why it's important on a couple of things. One is to protect kids, and two, to make sure states can regulate when it comes to factors such as child safety and data privacy, those sorts of things that states have a role to play in that. So I was very lucky to be a part of those conversations in DC, and we got to meet with some legislators, both on the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House side. So it was a great opportunity to be up there. And there are some great bills happening at the federal level. In particular, I'll give a shout out to Senator Josh Hawley's GUARD Act, really that's focused on chatbots and making sure that kids are protected from those relationship building chatbots.
Yeah, and this is such a unique time for us in America because how many times is there a topic that's actually a bipartisan issue that people from both sides really do care? I think that's one reason that this is really exciting because we're in the front end of this fight, and there's just this hope that we will get the privacy that we deserve. We're going to be protecting these children because it's not going to be a fight between parties, but we're actually fighting together on this issue.
Correct. Yes. And in particular, I'll restate it this way too. There's even studies coming out now when it comes to technology in the classroom that show that we went too fast with some of this technology implementing it in the classroom. It didn't result in positive outcomes. It cost the taxpayers tons of money to fund these types of products in the classroom. And so what we're asking for is to slow down, to put sensible guardrails in place that protect kids, and to really focus on the basics. That is what we're asking for here. And I'm hopeful that we can have that happen.
Yes, and part of our fight in AI is also that we've been part of these coalitions as well. So FLCA has been part of really exciting coalition letters that have been signed and sent out to officials in our country. I mean, it seems like these were actually nationwide. So again, FLCA, now we're doing part of these bigger fights. Obviously, we fight to protect citizens in Florida, Florida Citizens Alliance, but now we're kind of becoming leaders in this movement nationwide. Can you explain some of and talk about first of all what is a coalition letter,
Yes.
and then tell us about some of the ones we've been part of?
Yeah, so a coalition letter is a letter that's usually focused on a topic. So it could be a policy topic, it could be a bill that's moving through the process. And we've done them in Florida a bunch actually. But the ones that you're talking about are at the federal level. And so these coalition letters are created by an organization. They host the letter, and then they get organizations such as ours to sign on to them. And so we've actually signed on to uh, 4 coalition letters over the last month. And one of which I'll first start off by talking about the one that Humans First put out, which had to do with AI and a possible executive order coming out of the President of the United States office, the executive branch, related to the development of AI and putting guardrails to make sure that, again, as these products are released, that they're safe for the public. And so we were very fortunate enough to sign on to that letter. That letter has gotten a lot of attention. Some of the outlets that have covered it is Axios, the Washington Examiner, Times Magazine. And so we were one of 60 groups or 60 groups and individuals that had signed on to it. And I would like to also announce that the Vice President of the United States was actually asked a question related to the concerns that he brought up in this letter. So that shows that not only is the media um, knowing about this letter, but that the executive branch is also knowing about this letter, the executive branch of the United States. So that's really great that we were able to be a part of that.
So exciting. I mean, again, just the beginning of this fight, and it seems like there's already been a lot of movement there. So, and then what are some of the other coalition letters we've been part of so far in this last
Yes.
month?
So I'll kind of go through a few here now quickly, but we signed a letter on COSHA, which is the Kids Online Safety Act, and what that bill has to do is it really ties back to what we've done in Florida related to kids and making sure they're protected online from explicit content, from social media apps that have addictive features to them. So these are some of these parts of the kosher bill, and we signed on to the letter saying that we supported it. And then there was also 2 bills related to abortion that we signed on to. The first one was related to the abortion funding. Right now, abortion is not being funded at the federal level, so Planned Parenthood is not getting any federal funds. They're a nonprofit, and so they got some federal funds for a long time up until last year. And we were a big, we were involved in making sure that didn't happen last year. And now this year, there is talk that they're going to get their funding back again. And so we signed on to a letter that stated that we thought this was not good, that the funding should be withheld, not only because of abortion, because of other things as well. And so we signed on to that letter. That letter went out. And then lastly, related to abortion was the abortion pill. And so one of those things actually that we signed on to was a letter that was geared towards the DOJ, who actually under Biden had started a lawsuit against states for trying to regulate the abortion pill, such as Florida. And what this letter stated is that, hey, you know what? The abortion pill is bad. It needs to have some limits to how it's done. They're just taking a step back. The abortion pill in particular is a really interesting case study because its approval was very quick from the FDA, and the prior scenario with the abortion pill was that you had to go to a doctor in person to have it prescribed, and you had to take it in front of the doctor. And the reason that is because um, the abortion pill, especially as you get into later trimesters, affects your health as a mother in a severe way. And so that is why it actually states that you're not supposed to take it past a certain gestational age of your child because of the safety risks to yourself as the mother. And so that's what this letter was addressed to, trying to make sure that, again, that these there can be changes to some of these laws that are hurting women and also hurting our environment. That's also part of the studies too. This abortion pill is affecting our water. We talk about clean water in America, and the abortion pill is a chemical that can't be filtered out by current technology, and it is having, at least we think, effect on water quality based on studies, but also to, anecdotally, maybe even to fertility crisis issues.
Of course. And people don't talk about how, it also caused, so obviously with the abortion pill, there's always the death of the child, but in some cases there are the death of the mother or severely ill because a lot of women, especially, some of the left is just pushing this propaganda and this fear tactic of you need to get your abortion pill now, you need to do what it takes. And so some women are feeling like that extra pressure to make this huge decision, and they might take the pill, after the recommended time period, and that puts more of a risk for the mother. And obviously the child is, there's always the death of the child, which is horrific. And so we're talking a lot about some of these pro family and pro child issues, and a lot of people think, well, FLCA, you guys are all about education, right? You're all about micro schools. So can you tell us, Brian, some of these exciting things that we're putting into place so it's made known that FLCA is also fighting, beyond just the classroom for children?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So over the last number of years, we have been involved here in Florida on a number of things related to what I'll term as the pro-child policy movement. And what that means is, things like transgender treatment surgeries, things related to the abortion in Florida. We had an Amendment 4 in Florida a couple of years ago, and we went on a big educational campaign to let voters and people know about what that would do. And so a lot of these things that we've had success with, we are going to be compiling it onto our website. We're going to be putting out white papers and one-page summaries on our positions related to these topics. We're launching this summer. We'll be launching our pro-child policy page on our website. We're very excited to do that. Stay tuned for an email letting you know when it's live and social media posts when it's live. But again, we believe here at the Florida Citizens Alliance that a child's future is greatly determined by their family and by their educational setting. And yes, I mean, they spend most of their time in a classroom, so that's why we're so focused on education. But there's so many other things that affect children and their success later in life that we are working on addressing.
All right. So, I mean, like Ryan mentioned, this is not something that FLC is just starting to do. We've been doing it. We've been protecting children in and outside of the classroom, fighting for certain policies and things like that. So, this page on the website, the Pro Child Policy page, it's not that we're now starting addressing these issues. It's that we have been. We're just going to make it really clear to anyone who learns about FLCA that we have already been doing this. We're kind of making it just more clear that we do spearhead a lot of things within the education realm and micro schools, which we'll talk about later in our update. But this is just making it kind of known also policies that we've already been working on and that we've worked on in the past. So one of the exciting things when Ryan was in DC is that he actually got onto a podcast called Refining Rhetoric that has, I believe, more than 60,000 subscribers on YouTube. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah. So that was actually an interesting story. I was scheduled to be on that podcast prior to my trip to DC. Again, as I mentioned, I was invited there. Our organization was, and I went to represent us up there. And so I needed a location to do the podcast, and I was able to get a really great professional studio, podcasting studio, where I was able to do this podcast from. And so it was a great podcast. We talked about AI, of course, and how it affects children. In particular, this podcast is geared towards a lot of homeschool families. And so even though you may be in homeschool and you're not sending your kid to public school, AI is something they're going to interact with, especially if they have a one-to-one device like a phone or a laptop. That's what this podcast was about. And you can go check it out on all their YouTube page, on their social media for classical conversations. And so Refining Rhetoric is the name of the podcast.
Yes, it looked really awesome. Like the studio setup was really impressive and it was a great conversation. So definitely we invite all of you listeners to also listen in on that podcast. So let's talk about what's going on with FLCA this month that we can look forward to.
Yeah. So at the time of this recording, we're actually going to be heading to FPEA, which is the largest homeschool conference, they say, in the country. Definitely tens of thousands of people come to this conference. It's located.
FPEA stand for?
The Florida Parent Educators Association. And so it is geared towards parents, homeschool families that are members of this organization. You don't have to be a member to go to this conference. A lot of them are not members that attend this conference, but that's why it gets so large. And they have a lot of great resources for families. Of course, we're going to be there talking about two things. One is why it's important to protect our rights as parents to educate the children how we see fit, meaning school choice. And then also when it comes to our micro school initiative, which is one of our biggest things we're working on and we have a lot of success about.
Yes, and we'll have a separate update all about micro schools, how we're growing Florida wide. Every year we're getting more schools started. It's really exciting. So we can have a whole separate conversation on that, and we will. But you mentioned something really important that we fight for and we talk about when we are tabling at events such as FPEA, and that's defending school choice. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the state? Because everything's kind of changing, and it continues to change within the state and within the nation. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with school choice?
Yes. So school choice actually in the state right now is under a massive attack. There has been a couple of groups that have sued the state of Florida over our school choice program. And they've lumped in charter schools as part of this. What they argue is that this is against our Florida state constitution. And again, I think part of this reason, though, is because there are a massive amount of students that are leaving traditional public schools and instead choosing a private school, homeschooling, or micro school type scenario. And so it's competitive pressure, right? And so this is what's going on. There's this court case. We're very much so against it. From our perspective, this is an attack on parents' rights and the right of parents to decide how to raise their children and how to educate their children. So we are going to be, of course, defending that program as it goes on. Again, it's not always the most ideal program. We've may offered suggestions to improve it. However, the concept of school choice, the concept of letting parents decide what's best for their child is very important and needs to be defended. And we're going to keep doing that. And so moving forward, stay tuned for press releases coming out. Stay tuned for action alerts that may happen related to legislation, because every single year we go up to Tallahassee. We're hearing from legislators that they want to change our school choice program. And now, especially with the federal school choice program that was passed last year, the pressure is even going to be greater, because now those funds are starting to funnel down from the federal level into parents in Florida's hands over the next year. That's going to be happening. And so the pressure is only going to be increased.
So the charter school case that's happening, the court case, you're telling me that it's parents fighting against parents having a right to send to pick the way that their child is going to be educated? Is that what it is? Or is it the school itself?
Yeah.
Like
So
charter
there
schools?
are parents that have joined on to this lawsuit, but it's also the teachers union that's involved in this
Oh, of
lawsuit.
course. Yeah.
And so it's both. And their argument is that because of our Constitution, there's a provision in there that says that there should be free public education, paraphrasing. But that's what the provision says in our Constitution. And so they're arguing that the school choice program is against it, charter schools are against it, and that's just not the case. We are still providing that, and actually, in a case, this program is enhancing parents' abilities to have a good education for their children, and so that's very much so the case. And even just recent studies that have come out on third grade reading scores and reading scores across the board for that matter are showing that there needs to be alternatives to just the traditional public school system.
So what we're seeing is that the reading scores and scores across the board are they're just going down, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
and specifically were these were the studies done through like the reading tests that have to be done in public schools. Is it only public schools? Is this public charter and private school findings?
Yeah. So the study actually was done by Harvard, and it looked at nationally normed tests, and so like NAEP, and they really created a playing field where it was uniform. And what they've showed is that nationwide there's a decreasing in scores. It's a trend, and this trend has been going on since 2015. In particular in Florida last year, compared to last year, we decreased a little bit and the way they did it was based on school grade. So when you're in 12th grade, you should be reading at a 12th grade reading level. But in a lot of cases, they determine where you're at by grade level for reading and math skills. And so we actually we were going down a grade level. It was actually half a grade level, roughly, based on this new study. And so that was not good. And it just shows that, again, there needs to be competition. In particular, we at the Florida Citizens Alliance have jumped into the ring and said, hey, we're going to help start micro schools. And so these are one-room schoolhouses, co-ops, hybrid environments where parents can take charge of their kids' education and send them to a place where things could be better. And we help of these schools start. So we're very happy to do that. We've helped start over 20 schools in Florida, serving over 500 families. We expect that number of serving families to at least go to 600 at the end of this year, just based on the schools we have currently. And we expect to open up, 10 or more schools this year in Florida, if not double. So that's really great. And I would encourage people to check out our micro school program if that sounds good for your child.
Yes, and a lot of these micro school, programs that we're starting, they do originate more within like the Christian context because it happens to be Christian communities or, a community from a church or something that wants to start this. But we also at FLCA, we really encourage like the classical education route, even if it's within that Christian setting, going back to the classics, going back to like real education, like where did education even come from? It kind of came from the classics and having a really good background in just philosophy and critical thinking. These are all things that have been like lost in the school system that um, I mean, I was a teacher for 5 years and I just saw the critical thinking skills just decline and decline and decline. And the use of technology, kind of seeing the pros and the cons of that, because I was in a private school where there was the iPads and, we saw the negative effects. But I was looking at the third grade reading score thing, and I didn't really know fully the extent of the study that Harvard did. But I was kind of thinking to myself, like, why is it that these reading scores are getting so low? And I thought back to when I was a kid, and maybe Ryan, like, you could think back of I went to a public school, and I remember that they would have these programs like Accelerated Reader and things to encourage students to read more at home and to make sure that they were up to the grade level, right, up to par. I remember having these incentives. You would have a pizza party. Your class would have a pizza party if it got this amount of points. But besides that, like me, having those incentives in the public schools or in the charter schools, I think of how is the culture, the overall culture, um, how is it prioritizing reading and literature, and kind of seeing how technology has taken away from that. Now, when you go to a restaurant, you see all the kids on phones or iPads starting from the age of like 2 years old. We see kind of overall a lack of interest in reading among children, and that's a huge deal. And so this kind of goes back to the family, right? That we're here at Florida Citizens Alliance, we're fighting for here at Florida Citizens Alliance, we're fighting for the family and kind of how the family creates this base of something bigger that kind of leads into how is the culture going to be. So if at home we're not telling, our children to read, if we're not having a library for our kids at home, if we're not incentivizing that at home, we see that that interest is lost. So I think that's, something else to consider, and something that we at Florida Citizens Alliance can also, promote is what we're promoting is how education at the end of the day, it's really fostered at home. And you can have your kids go to school. You can even have them go to a school with all these, like with a higher moral standard, even if it's a Christian school, private school, whatever. But if that foundation of morals and ethics isn't like taking place at home, it's all going to be lost. And I saw this firsthand as a teacher. I taught at a Christian school, and I saw how, even though they were being taught or they were being formed in Christianity in the classroom in some sense, maybe they were having some services outside of the classroom to foster their faith. If that seed wasn't being planted in a ground that was fertile, the ground that has to take place at home, it's kind of like the seed wasn't really being planted. And that's that you can see that in anything. You can see that within the realm of faith or morals or ethics, and you can also see this just within education and how a child is raised. A lot of it has to do with what's happening in the classroom, whether this they're in a micro school, a private school, a charter school, a public school. But really, we just want to encourage that families start taking the lead of how their children are being raised. We can't just send our children out and think, oh, well, if we send them, even if it's a Christian school or even a micro school, which is great, it's a great alternative to have, but we still want to push our children within the setting of like the home, to be raised according to beauty, truth, and goodness. That's just something that I wanted to include because that's something that we also are fighting for. And what we encourage at Florida Citizens Alliance is parents leading the way and taking ownership of how their child's being raised all around. That goes beyond the classroom. And the classroom is so important because, like Ryan said earlier, they spend so much time in the classroom. Children are so much time in the classroom. But, it also, we have to think of what's happening at home. And technology and AI is going to play a huge role in that. That's why at Florida Citizens Alliance, we continue to fight to protect children from the dangers of those technologies. All right. Well, I don't know if there's anything else that we would like to discuss to wrap up this session of our updates, but as all of you listeners at home can tell, There's been a lot of exciting things happening at Florida Citizens Alliance. There's a lot more exciting things to come. Ryan, can you tell us about anything else that we're planning, any events or anything that our listeners can have in mind this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are planning some more AI symposiums across Florida, especially one in the summer and then a couple in the fall. And so we are very excited to do that. And so stay tuned for those. Watch your email, watch our social medias for those as those get announced. And on top of it, on top of our pro-child policy page, please check out our website. We have great resources there. We're going to be releasing a resource for parents and teachers about AI in the classroom and things to consider when your child is using AI. We're going to be doing a lot of these resources again to help educate families, parents, educators, all the stakeholders that are involved in a child's life, in particular, obviously the parent, and to have them know what to do on some of these important topics. So please check out our website, check out our social medias, and you can find a lot of great information on there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us, for sharing all the really exciting things happening at FLCA. And I'm sure we will be having you on again to give us an exciting update later this year. Thank you to all of you at home listening or watching this. We will see you next month with some exciting updates.